Welcome to the second match of day 2 of the preliminary round of the public sector debate competition. We're delighted to have you in our company for this milestone staging of the competition, including those of you who have joined us on our social media. I am Tomika Gunmighty, Communication Specialist here at the Transformation Implementation Unit. Yesterday saw the beginning of intellect and wit as teams vie to advance in this competition. If you missed your favorite team, you can always catch up on the matches on YouTube at TIU_Jamaica or on Facebook at TIU Jamaica. Continuing the action today, we have with us the Jamaica National Heritage Trust debating the Accountant General's Department and their Moot. Be it resolved that, on balance, trade unions are hindering rather than advancing a modern public service. I repeat, be it resolved that, on balance, trade unions are hindering rather than advancing a modern public service. Before we begin, we will invite the teams to introduce themselves, starting with the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. Thank you so much to Team JNHT. Now we turn our attention to the Accountant General's Department while their team introduce themselves.
Morning, everyone. Brandon Lee Fagan, first opposition speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Brittany Wright, second opposition speaker.
Greetings, everyone. Ashana Daniel Granville, with speaker.
Thank you so much to the team from the Accountant General's Department. Now, this morning we have with us also our partners from the Jamaica Association for Debating and Empowerment, who will be the adjudicators in this morning's match. We invite them to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rabon Matthews, and I'm the chair judge for this round.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Elsa Tinasa, I'm the servant of the
Thank you so much to our judges. Ladies and gentlemen, the teams are familiar with the rules. I now turn over to the judges. All the best to both teams.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let us get this show on the road. So teams, you know, we are debating the Jane parliamentary format. Now we'll see first speakers presenting for 7 minutes, second speakers for 6 minutes, and the third and final speakers, you'll present your case within 5 minutes. The first and last minute of each speech is considered rather protected time, in which no points of information will be allowed. You'll hear your time signal via the ding of a bell. That's what it sounds like. So the first time you hear that, you've exited your first minute of protected time. Points of information are now allowed. The second time you hear that bell ding, it means that you're in your last minute of your speech, your second period of protected time, no points of information allowed. At the end of your allocated speaker times, you'll hear the bell ding twice. That means that you've elapsed your allocated speaker minutes. After that, we give you a 15-second grace period to wrap up your case. After you've spoken for your allocated time plus 15 seconds, the bell will ding continuously. That means that the judges are no longer listening and you should yield the floor to your opponents, all right? Of course, we have the cross-examination period, which is always a crowd pleaser. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to that side of the debate. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to call to order this second match in this room of the public sector debate competition for 2026. We invite the first speaker from the Jamaica National Heritage Trust to open this debate. Hear, hear.
Good day, judges and honorable opponents. Before we dive in, Let's get the record straight. We are not against trade unions. This debate is not about whether trade unions have value. It's about whether, in today's context, they produce more harm than benefit in delivering an efficient and responsive public service. Let's define our terms. Trade unions are bodies made up of wage earners that utilize their collective labor power to seek improved wages and working conditions for their members. Hinder means to make slow or difficult the process of. Advancing means to accelerate the growth or process of. Both definitions from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Public service, according to the Jamaica Constitution, means the service of the Crown in a civil capacity in respect of the government of Jamaica. A modern public service is one that provides efficient, effective, and integrated customer-focused service. According to the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, a modern public service has 3 key factors: improve service excellence, information communication technology integration, improve human resource management. Envision with me, when we think about a modern public service, we think about quick, seamless, and smooth service that builds customer confidence and leave customers feeling satisfied. When we think about a modern public service, we are thinking about the welfare of workers and ensuring that there is adequate accountability. However, what currently exists is the complete opposite of the ideal vision for a modern public service. What currently exists is a slow, delayed, and unstable public service, and the actions of trade unions contribute to this. Again, this debate is not about the value of our trade unions, but it is on how their impact on a national level is doing more harm than good to the modernization of the public service. I will convey how the actions of trade unions hinder service excellence, productivity and efficiency, workers' welfare, and my second speaker will focus on accountability, information communication technology, and why the young generation isn't unionized. Let's get down to business. Trade unions impact the modernization of public service through industrial actions such as strikes, which create instability within the public service, eroding trust and increasing uncertainty among the public. How so? Let's look at a few examples. Jamaica Public Service strike in 2008, JPS, caused power outage for thousands of customers. National Water Commission workers' strike resulted in customers not being able to use running water for essential purposes. Jamaica Urban Transit Company workers' strike, leaving hundreds of customers stranded at bus stops. And every year, UTech teachers strike, leaving many students untaught and unsupervised. The evidence is clear that on a national level, trade unions are doing more harm than good, because we cannot say that we want a more modern public service, and yet still there are so many hindrances to these services. Moreover, due to the various internal processes, trade unions hinder the speed at which policies are implemented, therefore hindering the advancement of the public service. Example, Jamaica Teaching Bill. The Jamaica Teachers Association, JTA, said giving a response, they would need to contact their lawyer. The reality is that dispute resolutions and the process of negotiations are heavily bureaucratic, not at this time, within trade unions, resulting in prolonged decision-making and delayed implementation of critical reforms, again hindering the advancement of the modern public service. Another example, according to an article from the Jamaica Observer on August 29, 2025, the government provided a new wage offer. However, the JTA has to go through prolonged committee deliberations. Listen, this bureaucratic process directly conflicts with the speed and adaptability required for a modern public service. Another example, according to the Office of National Statistics 2023, in the United Kingdom, travel strikes between June 2022 and February 2023 resulted in gross domestic product falling by an estimated 0.5% in December 2022. This reveals that continuous industrial actions can lead to a decrease in productivity and efficiency, hindering the advancement of the public service. I must add here, a report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reveals that across its 38 member states, union density has halved since 1985, falling from 30% to 15% in 2023 to about 2024. These are the very countries leading in modern public service. This is no accident. These statistics reveal that less bureaucratic resistance allows for faster innovation. Workers' welfare, taken.
If it is reasonable for unions to want to see, isn't it reasonable for unions to want to seek legal representation before agreeing to everything that the GOJ says?
Yes, we're not against the fact that they're looking legal representation or looking advice from a legal officer, but what we're saying is that they need to try to way to speed up the processes so that our public service can be advanced. Workers' welfare is a key component of service excellence. While trade unions cannot directly implement policy, they are expected to advocate for reforms. However, in the case of the flexible work arrangement, it was the Ministry of Efficiency, Innovation and Digital Transformation that recognized the underutilization of this beneficial tool and initiated a phased rollout on February 2, 2026. This lack of aggressive push signals complacency and not advancement. And I must add that these continuous industrial actions cause so many to suffer. When JUTC strikes, working parents feel it. When our nurses strikes, it hinders the welfare of workers and citizens in other countries. And Accountant General Department, you know that if you should strike, it would impact persons getting their pensions and so on. It would be so devastating. And let's be real, a public service that stops working for the public is no longer serving its purpose. Again, we are not against trade unions. However, persistent industrial action weakens public trust, and bureaucratic negotiation processes slow reform. As a result, the pace of public service modernization is significantly hindered. Therefore, on balance, trade unions are impeding rather than advancing a modern public service. The evidence is clear. Side proposition rests.
Thank you very much. That was Michael Treasure, first speaker from the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. At this point in time, we'd like to invite the first speaker from the Accountant General's Department, Brandon Lee Fagan.
Mr. Speaker, adjudicators, my opponents, members of the physical and digital audience, I greet you well. The proposition just stated that strikes have, just provided public inconvenience. But I say to this, short-term disruption is the cost of protecting long-term system fairness. Without those protection, you get burnout, resignation, and even system collapse. That would harm the public far more. This debate is fundamentally about whose world you would want to live in. Do you believe in the proposition's world where accountability is a one-way street going in favor of the powerful at the expense of the weak? Or do you believe inside opposition, who will tell you that a modern public service is a people-centered enterprise that values two-way accountability and employee empowerment for action? In our world, Mr. Speaker, it is the people who form the core of any modernization project, in the public sector or outside of it. It is for that reason, ladies and gentlemen, that on balance, trade unions have not hindered a modern public service. They have enhanced it. To win this debate, the proposition must prove to you that by advocating for the Jamaican public sector workers and their interests, yes, sometimes forcefully, trade unions have irreparably damaged the ability of the public service to advance, develop, and to thrive. They cannot meet that burden, Mr. Speaker, and so side proposition must lose this debate. They would first have to clear the hurdle that is PICA with their e-passport and automated border crossing kiosks. They would have to clear the hurdle that is the NHT with the loan end-to-end solution, HART with their virtual academy, Ministry of Finance launching TIU. They would have to clear the hurdle of all agencies that have modernized and are modernizing with unionized workers at their core. As first speaker, I will show you how the people-centered advocacy of trade unions has, on balance, advanced the cause of a modern public service by inspiring transformation and change. I will show you where the true blame for hindrance of a modern public service lie. I will also show when it matters most, it was trade unions who stood up and sacrificed for our country and salvaged the most extensive economic reform program in our history. My second speaker, Brittany, will confront head-on the misguided belief that strident trade union advocacy is a hindrance to modernity. She will prove that it is unreasonable to expect trade unions to kowtow with governments when the rights and privileges of workers, the foundation of any modern public service, is at stake. Our reply speaker, Ashani, will identify the clashes and prove why unbalanced side opposition wins this debate. We begin with some definitions. When we say unbalanced, we're calling for a holistic weighing of all the evidence on this matter. A modern public service should be understood as the development of a highly skilled, adaptable, and fairly compensated workforce that effectively leverages technology to drive efficiency, innovation, and service excellence. That is to say, Mr. Speaker, a modern public service is not an abstract factory, it is entirely a human institution. And where human institutions exist, representation is key, so trade unions are vital. Permit me to give the proposition a brief history lesson where in 1938, strife and discord were upon the land, from the sugar estate in Frome in Westmoreland to the docks in Kingston. The rights of workers were abused and trampled upon. The relationship between government and its employees were characterized by indignity and shaped by the colonial construct of master and servant. It was the unionization born at Frome that advanced the modern principles of workers' rights, which eventually gave rise to fair work for fair wage in 1975, entitlement to leave like maternity leave in 1979 or paternity leave in 2023 to encourage fathers for early childhood bonding, and even education grants in 2015 to 2018 for public sector workers and their children. You name it, trade unions championed it. No reasonable person can suggest that advocacy and the wins it resulted hindered our modern public service. You see, ladies and gentlemen, if trade unions with their people-centric, people-focused advocacy had not pushed, encouraged, and resisted, the foundation on which the modern public service now thrives could not have been realized. I repeat, Mr. Speaker, trade unions have enhanced, not hindered a modern public service. So, have ruling out trade unions as the hindrance to a modern public sector, what is the real culprit, you may ask? We suggest to you that it is chronic underfunding and the lack of resources that have stifled the modernization push in the public sector. Just ask the teachers who have to deal with overcrowded classrooms, or doctors and nurses who don't even have a lunchroom to rest after a 12-hour demanding shift. These are real stories, Mr. Speaker. These public sector's workers don't blame trade unions for their plight and slow pace in modernization. They blame the lack of resources. They have been given baskets to carry water, and this government is trying to pull wool over your eyes. I urge you, reject the proposition's case. When measuring everything on balance, we must weigh short-term delays against long-term stability. That is where we win this debate, because it cannot be persuasively proven that over a long sweep of history, trade unions have been a hindrance. Most recent history, between 2012 to 2015, when Jamaica stood on the precipice of economic ruin with a debt-to-GDP ratio of 145%, we were the pariah of the international financial world. Leading economic publications refer to us as the basket case of economic management. The public sector wage bill posed a tremendous challenge for economic reform. The government needed trade unions to agree to significant wage freezes, which gave the government room to modernize and stabilize the entire economic framework of the country. If, as the proposition would have you believe, that trade unions are unreasonable and irrational hindrances to a modern public service, why didn't they resist? Why did they agree to these wage freezes and actively participated in tasks and negotiations of the public sector of how it should look like after these economic reform programs? Trade unions were partners in economic modernization that inspired new laws and economic gains related to public financial management. Those economic gains have now been invested in the public sector. Modernization is proceeding apace. No jobs were lost, no unrest, no strife, only stability. Trade unions deserve their credit for their part in that. Trade unions are not the culprit you seek. The proposition is trying to turn these patriots into the problem. Side opposition says no. I rest my case.
All right, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now at the first period of cross-examination. For this segment of debate, we will see the team in opposition pose 3 questions to the team in proposition. It's important to note that each question can last no more than 10 seconds and each answer can last no more than 45 seconds. For the team who's asking the question, only one person may do so at any given point in time. However, for the team that is answering the question, the entire team can chime in to provide a robust answer. After opposition has posed their 3 questions and they've been answered, we'll invite within the same period of cross-examination proposition to do the same. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, we now open this first period of cross by inviting Accountant General's Department to pose their first question.
Proposition. If unions cause strike, why do strikes overwhelmingly follow failed negotiations or unilateral reforms? One, two, okay. If unions cause strikes, why do strikes overwhelmingly follow failed negotiations or unilateral reforms?
My question to the proposition is this. If unions are so much of an obstacle, then why is it that the JCTU signed that historic restructuring of the public service, moving the public service from 325 salary scales? Why is it that the JCTU signed that historic restructuring, moving the public service from 325 salary scales to 20?
Can proposition explain why Senator Dr. Dana Morris Dixon is urging unions to leverage their influence to shape digital policy if they are supposedly sons in the gears of this modernization?
Please repeat.
Can the proposition explain why Senator Dr. Dana Morris Dixon is urging unions to leverage their influence to shape digital policy if they are supposedly the sand in the gears for modernization?
It is because they are not doing enough. That is why she would have to be saying that they should leverage or do more to actually modernize the public service. So it's not that we're not saying that they're not doing enough, but what we're saying is that they need to do more in order for the public service to be advanced and modernized.
All right, thank you very much for that first half of this first period of cross-examination. At this point in time, we invite the team JNHT to pose their 3 questions.
How is service disruption advancement?
Thing that trade unions do is disrupt service. Nevertheless, the harsh reality is this. A lot of these negotiations that you insist on them speeding through, they take time.
Fast reforms that workers reject lead to the strikes and failures. So to have a sustainable environment, we require the buy-in. So if we don't, then we will lead to these strikes.
How do the benefits outweigh the public harm?
Kindly repeat.
How do the benefits outweigh the public harm?
So, in my initial statement, when I finished my speech, I showed you that, for example, if the current strike that is going on now is not, or rather, the reason for the current strike now is because previous conditions were unsuitable. If those conditions were continued, we wouldn't just have strikes, we would have people walking off the job.
And so it is important to realize that the trade union's input is needed continuously, not just at the beginning of a process. You need the people's input continuously in order to make the service better.
How can you claim that trade unions are advancing service when citizens are left without it? Oftentimes.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
How can you claim trade unions are advancing service when citizens are left without it, when members of the public are left without it? Majority of the time, sometimes, due to these actions.
I am not certain what this it is that you're referring to. I'm going to make the assumption that you're referring to public services in general. And I'm saying trade unions are not actually being a hindrance to public services. They are not. In fact, the reason why there is no minister responsible for modernization is because the government and the trade unions see that these two need to meet in order to advance the public service.
All right. And that is the third question, and this first period of cross-examination come to a close. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we invite Brittany Green, second speaker from the JNHT, to extend the case for side proposition. Hear, hear.
Honorable judges, my delightful opponents, audience, good morning. Before I get into it, my opponents talk about long-term system fairness. When children cannot go to school due to JUTC strikes, children cannot learn due to teacher strikes. Fair, but fair to who? For that short-term disruption, that, the opposition, we would like to know what would you mean by that. Honorable judges, today we stand here mindful of the impacts that our trade unions have made through history, but more so aware of the fact that history without advancement is inertia. A balance has been struck, and we, the proposition, find trade unions to be hindering the advancing of a modern public service. My first speaker came and painted an ideal modern public service and the ways in which the trade unions are hindering, but let me be Picasso in today's debate. Imagine a Jamaica where a modern public service is not only about employee welfare, as my first speaker would have politely bargained for, but more so a Jamaica that is disciplined and takes, what's the word, accountability. A modern public service is firmly grounded in strong accountability. Let's paint the picture. A public hospital, UE, not chaotic, not quite collapsing, but stretched thin. Patients everywhere, doctors tired. Now let's go to scene 2. Instead of shutting down, not at this time, instead of shutting down of the hospital, trade unions sitting across from the MOF, no stalling, no workouts, there's data, there's tension, but controlled. Hard questions are asked, and the answer? Compliance, unity, results, transparency. A still busy hospital, but operates so much better. My opponents, the unions show up, answered for the influence and use in their position. Responsibly, that is the scale. But the reality of this is so much different. What is currently happening begs to differ. In 2022, 17 unions signed onto a $120 billion compensation restructure. Honorable judges, as reported by the Gleaner, it is now April 2026, and unions are still in limbo regarding this same compensation as a dispute of misinterpretation and framing. The fact that unions must now clarify what they themselves agree to shows a failure in transparency and accountability during negotiations. That is not accountability. I don't even know what that is called. Judges, another key factor of modernizing our public service includes information, communication, and technology. Trade unions can significantly hinder ICT mechanisms in the public service by prioritizing insane protectionism over necessary technological adoptions.
Point of information.
Go ahead.
If trade unions stand in front of these information technology benefits, why did they assist speaker to enhance their workers to use the automated kiosks and other systems that have come in place to better this information technology system?
Sorry, I'm not hearing you.
All right, so I'm saying since trade unions have impeded information technology advancements, for example, as I'm saying, why did the trade unions assist speaker in upskilling their workers to use automated
Okay, so it's a case where they are not efficiently doing the process. How long did it take them to assist with getting that advancement? In an agency such as the Police Record Office, which is such an important factor for a Jamaican workforce, modernizing this public service is definitely a requirement from the paper-based system to digital systems. The failure to transition to ICT is not just resistant to modern public service, but it reflects a deeper lack of effectiveness within the service. Now, the entire Kingston population is standing in a 3-hour line on Duke Street as early as 7 a.m. on a Monday morning. Unions have this problematic approach where they resist digitalization because they equate it to job displacement, which is not always the case. And countries like Barbados and Guyana can attest to this. In 2023, the then minister with oversight for skills and digital transformation with a portfolio in the OPM, Minister Dana Morris-Dixon, as my opponent did advise before, says that trade unions should leverage their influence to shape public policy, especially in the areas of digital transformation, allowing for a system that supports lifelong learning opportunities. She would say this because she's advising that you guys need to do more. Need to push the system. The delays that you go through in regarding to negotiations put a stop or a delay on that. Growth in the advancing public sector judges, if this has been done, there would not be comments about reforming on the end of the trade unions. ICT transformation does not occur in isolation. It is proportionate to structural reform. And when unions resist those forms for the reasons of job security instead of job opportunities, the practicality is that this hinders advance in modern public service. Honorable judges, let's look at a more people-centric reality. Trade unions in their current form are making it difficult for young workers to become unionized because of their reluctance to improve the modern public service, often in the name of job security has made them less attractive, particularly to young workers. My opponents, in preparing for this debate, the team did an assessment regarding unionism in our agency. This exercise, which concluded with approximately 77 people, suggested that only 51% of the staff are unionized, while 49% are not within the lower percentage, represent ages 20 to 38 years old. A clear trend, I might add, but why is this so? In December of 2019, a Gleaner article confirmed suspicions that young workers have been shunning away from trade union movements. The president of the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, JCTU, claims that millennials are yet to fully understand the benefits of collective bargaining. But as a millennial standing before you today, we get it. It's just not enough. When balance is weighed, the negatives seem higher than Jamaica's. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Brittany Green from the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite Brittany Wright from the Accountant General Department to extend the debate.
Mr. Speaker, judges, my opponents, and the audience, a pleasant morning to you. Before I begin, I'd like to rebut a point that Team Proposition made. They kept going on and on about strikes as the main argument. But trade unions don't only incite strikes, and strikes are the last resort when pressing issues that exist are not being addressed by the government. I'd like to begin with a piece of a speech from the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who said, and I quote, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be opposed upon them." I begin here, Mr. Speaker, because having heard two speakers from the other side, it is important to remind this gathering of certain fundamental principles. First is that unions exist to secure the rights of workers. Wherever in the world you go, collective bargaining is deemed a moral good, not a hindrance. Those who oppose collective bargaining and unionization do so because they know it weakens the hand of the workers, it retards progress, it maintains the status quo, and that is the opposite of modernization. No public sector can modernize itself by maintaining the status quo, and so the collective advocacy of trade unions is essential to enabling, not hindering, a modern public sector simply because there is strength in numbers. And so unapologetically and with confidence in the correctness of our stance, we reiterate that far from hindering a modern public service, trade unions have enabled a service that is grounded on the development of a highly skilled, adaptable, and fairly compensated workforce that leverages technology to drive efficiency, innovation, and service excellence. That is the work of unions, and that is the work side opposition defends. It has served the proposition short-sighted view to tell you that unions have resisted and that they have been assertive through collective bargaining. But we don't cower from that assertion. In fact, we defend it. We defend it, Mr. Speaker, because on balance, that assertiveness has been to the benefit of the public sector as a whole. Look at the Petrojam strike in 2023, for example. Our opponents will focus on the disruption caused, but that disruption didn't happen because unions were careless. It happened because problems with pay and working conditions were allowed to get worse. That assertiveness in the end allowed for unresolved compensation and workplace concerns to be addressed. Additionally, advocacy by its very nature sometimes must be combative because power will not concede without the demand. It is unreasonable to expect that in an environment where the representatives of workers, the trade unions, are negotiating against institutions with greater power, they will always be meek and pious. That would be a malpractice and a dereliction of trade unions' duty to the workers they represent, as they by very nature must be unapologetic activists. And nothing in this debate turns on that. So the question here is, Mr. Speaker, whether on balance, when all is considered, trade unions have been a hindrance. And the answer to that is no. My first speaker has already proven to you that at moments of grave national peril, unions have stepped up and been reliable partners. I will go further. Contrary to the claims of the proposition, trade unions believe in the importance of continuity of service to the public. In instances where workers have been so aggrieved that sickouts or outright strikes have occurred, it is the same unions who have urged calm, restraint, and for workers to return to work, no doubt driven by the principle that a modern public service requires workers who are on the job and delivering for the Jamaican people. One such example of this is when the JUTC drivers decided to strike over a worker dispute in 2025. These same drivers were urged by their union, the University and Allied Workers Union, to resume their operations and their industrial action so that they could sit down and have further discussions with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So if, as our proposition tells you, trade unions have been a hindrance to a modern public service, why have they not urged workers to stay off the job and continue wholesale sabotage and disruption across the service? This is because, Mr. Speaker, trade unions believe in dialogue and negotiation. They are committed to progress, not delay or hindrance. They're enablers of a modern and efficient public service. But beyond general advocacy, Mr. Speaker, there's also been the persistent upskilling and reskilling of workers, all of which has contributed to the modern public sector we enjoy today. Trade unions have worked hard to increase the competency of public sector workers so that they can serve you, the public, better. Unions have consistently championed upskilling in education and technology across the public sector, and this positively affects modernization efforts. Trade unions not only actively enhance a modern public service, they facilitate it by ensuring workers are equipped to participate in it. We see that clearly with the RUN project, standing for Reskilling, Upskilling, and New Skilling, facilitated by the Transformation and Implementation Unit. This was heavily supported by the Jamaica Civil Service Association and was created to provide public sector workers with fully funded certification courses, the skills they need in a world that is becoming more digital and modern. Mr. Speaker, big projects like these don't happen on their own. They require consultation, engagement, and buy-in from the workforce. Also, too, the public sector learning and development policy being led by MIND. This is to help redesign how training and learning is done within the public sector through continuous upskilling and also with the adaptation to digital transformation. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know that time is against me. So what I'd like to say is that in Team Proposition's world, they more so want to sacrifice workers in the name of modernity, leaving their rights exposed and subjected to the whims of the ruling government. Essentially, trade unions would amount to yes men if they're supposed to agree to everything and not challenge the status quo. So I repeat the question Brandon posed. Whose world do you want to live in? A world where the public sector is people-centered, or one in which people are sacrificed on that altar of modernity? Choose people, choose side opposition. I thank you.
And thank you very much. That was Brittany White from... Right. Oh, I see the pun now. I see the pun. So that was Brittany from the Accountant General's Department. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now entering into the second period of cross-examination. At this point in time, we'd like to invite first the Jamaica National Heritage Trust to pose their questions.
What proof do you have that trade unions are balancing the protection of employees' rights without creating a culture of impunity?
Thank you for the question. It is very interesting that you asked a question when you just admitted not too long ago that 51% of your own workforce, by your own admission, are still members of the union. Are you saying then that the trade union members do not have their own best interests at heart?
How does the level of job protection serve the public rather than the employee?
Wait, go, speak a bit louder. No, can you speak a bit louder or repeat?
All right, we've been asked to repeat the question.
Do you accept that protecting underperforming workers can directly reduce the quality of service?
So it seems that might be a different question. So we're asking you to repeat the question that you had asked initially.
How does the level of job protection serve the public rather than the employee?
So, just to answer your question, trade unions want to ensure due process, not immunity. Managers still have the authority to discipline, but it must be done in a fair and evidence-based manner.
Do you accept that protecting underperforming workers can directly reduce the quality of service to the public?
We reject the notion that trade unions exist simply to protect quote-unquote lazy workers. Trade unions do a lot more than that. They help to frame legislation, they aid in negotiations, they are a presence at the table for everything that is good when it comes to the public service.
All right, thank you very much, JNHD. We now invite 3 questions from the Accountant General's Department.
Does the proposition believe that modernization can occur through underfunding, or do they admit that underspending is simply a postponement of growth that leaves the public service to fight 21st century battles with 20th century tools?
Please repeat.
Does the proposition believe that modernization can be done through underfunding, which leaves the public service to fight 21st century battles with 21st century tools?
All right, so again, we are not against trade unions protecting workers and so on. What we are saying is that trade unions, their actions, if they don't modernize their actions, it will result in the reduction in the advancement of our public service.
Okay. Is a modern service one that ignores the daily realities of workers, or one that adopts the union-backed view that productivity and worker well-being are complementary goals?
Repeat.
Is a modern service one that ignores the daily realities of workers, or one that adopts the union-backed view that productivity and worker well-being are complementary goals?
All right, so again, we are not against the fact that workers have rights, right? And workers' rights should be advocated for. However, our point of contention is this, that in order for us to move on, to progress in the public service system, then we must find a way that does not hamper the persons who we serve. We have to find a way. We cannot deny the fact that the actions oftentimes result in the reduction or the hindrance of our modern public service.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. At this point in time, the debate is going to pause for 1 minute to allow the finishing touches to be placed on those reply speeches, after which we'll invite the reply speaker from the Accountant General, followed by the reply speaker from the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. Now, to conclude this debate for the Accountant General's Department, we invite the final speaker, Shauna Daniel Granville.
Mr. Speaker, my first speaker has already demonstrated that this is fundamentally a battle of two worlds. We have to decide which one do we really want to live in. He showed how the people-centered advocacy of trade unions, on balance, advance the cause of a modern public service by inspiring transformation and change. He also showed how, when it mattered most, the trade union stood up and sacrificed for our country, including taking a wage freeze for years. On top of that, he delivered a policy alternative and showed that the true blame for the hindrances of the public service lies not with the trade unions, as the proposition insists. The real culprit is chronic underfunding of the public service. My second speaker confronted head-on the misguided belief that strident trade union advocacy is a hindrance to modernity. She repeated that power concedes nothing without a demand. The first opposition speaker focused a lot on speed. She wants the unions to hurry up in the negotiations that are taking place. Doesn't she know that haste makes waste? She focused a lot on industrial actions of trade unions, as if all trade unions do are strikes. But then, what of collective bargaining? What of interest-based bargaining? What of the dialogue that is taking place between the trade unions as they champion a modern public service? She wants teachers to hurry up and sign away their rights without talking to a lawyer. Then she admits that the government themselves need the union to help to influence the public servants. They are clearly misguided. And then the second proposition speaker spoke a lot about accountability. I asked this question: is it reasonable to ask for accountability without the proper financial and other resources I think not. Trade unions are not against accountability, but accountability must be a two-way street. The government can't give the public servants basket for carry water. She spoke about efficiency. What really is it? What does it cost? Is it cheap? Does it require adequate resources to then deliver adequate amount of efficiency? They also mentioned that membership is down in trade unions, but the harsh reality is that trade unions are still an enhancement to a modern public service. And so, Mr. Speaker, I say, let us settle this matter once and for all. I challenge the proposition, when the trade unions go on the record against My HR Plus, when the trade unions go on record as opposing PICA's automated border crossing system, when did the trade unions go on record as opposing the modernization taking place at Tax Administration Jamaica? When did the RUN program and the other government efforts to reskill, upskill, and empower civil servants with new skill? Finally, Mr. Speaker, the proposition must say, when was the last time the public service was really and truly adequately funded and the actions of the trade union was the sole hindrance to the government from achieving its objectives? Then, and only then, can they even pretend for a moment that trade unions don't have justified concerns. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the public service in Jamaica is powered by tens of thousands of public servants and technocrats, all of whom desire to see Jamaica increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity, and play her part in the advancement of the whole human race. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask again, whose world do we really want to live in? You can and you should choose a world where the public sector is a people-powered enterprise. The alternative is a world where the people are sacrificed on the altar of modernity. Choose people, choose side opposition. Thank you for listening.
All right, and finally, to conclude the debate, we invite the final speaker, that is the third speaker from Team JNHT, Gleson Mitchell Dunn. Hear, hear.
Honorable judges, worthy opponents, and members of the public, good morning. Now, my opponents spoke about people-powered enterprise, but without the people, the public that we serve, who are we? You say choose people. Yes, I'm all for rights, but what about the rights of the public that we serve? At this stage of the debate, the opposition wants you to believe that because trade unions protect workers, they must therefore be advancing a modern public service. Respectfully, that argument sounds noble until it meets the facts. Let us return to the moot at hand. On balance, are trade unions hindering rather than advancing a modern public service? The answer, based on evidence before us, is yes. We have never denied the role of trade unions in employee welfare. That is not the argument, and that is not the argument we have brought forward. We have made it abundantly clear, but the moot requires balance. The question is whether those benefits outweigh the disruption, delay, and economic strain they create. On balance, they do not. The pillars of a modern public service is service, trust, productivity, accountability, and efficiency. Delayed accountability and ICT resistance frustrate those very standards. Across the public service, issues that require urgent intervention are too often met with prolonged process, delayed response, and uncertainty that lingers far beyond what efficiency should permit. Workers are left waiting on representation, waiting on clarification, waiting on resolution. And while they wait, morale drops, productivity suffers, and trust in the system that was put in place to protect us weakens. What is that? At some point, process without pace stops being representation and starts becoming obstruction. Representation delayed becomes justice denied. Now look at the lived reality. The citizen standing in line at Duke Street from 7 a.m. What should have been a digital transaction becomes a 3-hour wait because reform moves slower than resistance. And this is why ICT matters. A modern public service is inseparable from digital transformation. Online applications, automated payroll, digital record systems, efficient public access. Yet when restructuring is delayed and unions resist changes in work structure rather than embracing, retaining, retraining, and opportunity, ICT transformation is slowed. The only difference between modernization and stagnation is that one clicks, the other still keys. That is not just a line. That is the reality many Jamaicans experience every single day. The Gleaner reported that industrial action involving NWC workers affected approximately 500,000 customers and resulted in $240 million in losses. 500,000 people, $240 million. Short-term disruption. How can the opposition stand here and call that advancement? When unions stall reforms, citizens stand in line. That is not modernization. That is disruption institutionalized. Now let us address relevance. Young workers are increasingly disconnected from union structures. We did not say that people are not joining. We're saying that the young individuals of today, the young people of the public service, they are slowing down. Do you blame them? And perhaps that is the clearest sign that the current model is failing. The very generation meant to inherit the public service is losing confidence in it. When young professionals no longer see unions as vehicles of progress, that is not just a warning sign. That is a system in decline. The opposition continues to romanticize protection, but let us be honest. At some point, what they call protection starts looking a lot like permission for poor performance. The only difference between protection and permission is that one defends excellence, the other excuses mediocrity. A modern public service cannot thrive where inefficiency is tolerated and accountability is weak. Now let us weigh the scale. On one side, employee welfare, representation, wage protection. On the other, delayed intervention, weakened trust, ICT stagnation, 500,000 citizens affected, 240 million in losses. The judges, the scale is clear. The opposition continues to romanticize what unions once were, but we are here to judge what they are now. And unbalanced trade unions are not advancing a modern public service. They are holding it hostage to outdated structures and slow-moving process. The numbers speak for itself. The people feel it, and they confirm it. When accountability is delayed and ICT reform is resisted, when workers wait too long for intervention, and when the next generation no longer sees relevance, the balance is unmistakable. The proposition rests.
Thank you so much to both teams, ladies and gentlemen. Give them another round of applause. And by the way, it's two Britneys, not just one. Two Britneys, okay? Are trade unions a break or are they a boost? The team from Jamaica National Heritage Trust debating against the team from the Accountant General's Department, the Moot. Be it resolved that, on balance, trade unions are hindering rather than advancing a modern public service. Ladies and gentlemen, the arguments have been made, and all that's left is for the judges to deliberate. So we take a short break, and they will come back with the scores and the winning team's information. Please stay tuned.
Ladies and gentlemen, the motion before the House read, rather the moot before the House today read, be it resolved that unbalanced trade unions are hindering rather than advancing a modern public service. This moot required a delicate balancing act. A team does not win this debate simply by pointing out how the trade union hinders or how the trade union advances a modern public sector. A team wins this debate by saying that on balance, when we put the two items in the scale, which one leads to the greater outcome or which one doesn't. It's also important to note that whether or not the public sector is advanced or not is periphery to this debate. It questions whether or not the trade union has hindered or advanced that particular thing. In other words, the public sector can be advanced despite the acts of the trade union which has been hindering them. That's a key distinction that needs to be made in the debate. Nevertheless, how did we see this? Well, we understood coming out from Nisha Ann, my apologies for mischaracterizing your name earlier, from Nisha Ann, that what's happening right now is that the trade unions engage in industrial action, strikes. They do that quite a bit, and they do that quite a lot, and those strikes, she contends, are really indicative of the fact that they are bad actors. She explains how strikes are bad in two distinct ways. Rather, the team explains it in two distinct ways. One, when strikes occur, then we see great service disruption. And this is indicative, they contend, of a failure of a modern society, rather a modern public service, because it leaves individuals without access to JUTCs, without access to water, without access to light. And this is a big deal, they contend, because how can we characterize a modern public service as one who routinely, or at least occasionally, causes the beneficiaries of that public service to go without necessary public goods? We think that's an interesting idea, and we buy it to a large extent. The question then becomes, again, we place that on the scale. How are we weighing this idea? Other interesting ideas that come out is the fact that trade unions consistently serve as a barrier to the adoption of policy. They're heavily bureaucratic, they take a lot of time to get things done, and when it is that the government wants to push forth a policy, trade unions, for a large extent, sit down and are antagonistic to that. That was a big part of the case that came from proposition, as well as this really interesting idea that we think needed a little bit more work about how trade unions are antithetical to digitization and ICT. Now what then? So these are the items that we place on the right side of the scale. That's proposition. Now, how then do we contend with Accountant GD? Accountant GD says, well, one, it's important to note that strikes occur, yes, but several things. Strikes are not nearly as frequent as we would want proposition would have us to believe. That's one. Two, at the point in which a trade union has engaged in industrial action, it is a point of no return. It is a point in which the trade union has consistently been at the table trying to negotiate with government, trying to get these particular good actions and outcomes from government, and government has refused to do it. And it is at that point in time where we have industrial action. That's one. Two, industrial action actually is not that bad because the alternative opposition contents is seeing these individuals who are so upset that they would strike, holding in that stress, not getting the opportunity to demonstrate that stress, and that actually leads to worse outcomes had they not chosen to strike, such as walking off the job. Now that significantly undermines the contention from team proposition that strikes are such a big deal towards to a modernizing public sector. So it undermines that argument to a great extent. We also appreciate as well that trade unions also do a bunch of good stuff. They tell us that trade unions advocate for individuals, and in fact there are a lot of digitization and examples of modern public service that are actually not just allowed by trade unions but are encouraged by trade unions. We get this idea as well that there is a historical context of the trade unions doing these particularly good things, upskilling and reskilling, and these are interesting ideas. Now, how then does the judges weigh the debate? We think a large portion of proposition's case, and the judges will contend a disproportionate portion of proposition case lies in industrial action, right? We also heard the different ideas, but the crux and most important piece of your case that you submitted was that of industrial action. As per my earlier explanation and analysis, we think that was significantly undermined by Team Accountant General. We think the idea of ICT is interesting, but when we compare your claim that the trade unions are antithetical and antagonistic towards ICT, we think that a little bit more mechanization needed to go into it. So what about a trade union makes them intrinsically against modernization and digitization? We got a little bit of that. We wanted to hear a lot more. When we weighed that idea against the evidence-based approach that comes from team opposition about several institutions such as PICA, such as TAJ, other institutions that have implemented these digitization structures without opposition from trade unions, and very often with the support of trade unions, we couldn't buy that ICT argument very much. And so, ladies and gentlemen, after weighing the debate on the scale, the judges would have concluded that the team that wins this match on 200, let me get the scores right, the team that wins this match, the team that wins this match on 278 points to the other team's 270 points, advancing with 3 points to the preliminary round 2, is the team in opposition, Accountant General's Department. Congratulations, Accountant General's Department. Well played, Team JNHT. The best debater from this match also comes to us from the Accountant General's Department, and that is Brittany Wright. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes this match in the public sector debates. Join us in a few moments where we will see match number 3 in this room. Until then.